Hmm? Bunny? Bunny way?
Bunny way.
Bunny way?
Bunny way. What's that mean? I have no idea.
Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Trash Talk, Every Frame a Dumpster Fire. I'm TK, aka Trash, aka the creator of all things trash, and I'm joined today by my co-host Eric.
Hello.
We are going to be starting very first ever episode, very fittingly, with the movie StarGate. A very important movie in my life, in a way, and kind of okay. I don't know.
It's early Roland Emmerich. It's a very interesting film that ended up spawning a massive franchise, surprisingly. But we'll just be getting into the first film.
Yes, there is definitely not time to go through the entire 10-season series, plus the spinoff, plus the other two movies. But I think we're just going to start, as I think we will with every episode. How many Sheen Beans out of 10 Sheen Beans do you give this movie?
Ooh, out of 10?
Out of 10.
That's tricky. It's always hard to give ratings to films. Probably a 5 or a 6 from me.
That's about where I'm at, is a 5.5, I think.
It
I don't know
boils...
how you get a half Sheen Bean. He gets cleaved by an orc, and it's a half Sheen Bean.
Oh yeah, that'll work out. It's a lot of stuff in this film that is like above average. Some of the stuff which is just pure schlock, so it sort of balances
Yeah.
out in the middle. But this is a favorite of yours from when you were a kid, yeah?
So the way this actually started was my dad was watching the TV series, because the TV series started in the early 2000s when I was just about old enough to watch it. Like some of the later seasons when things I remember watching, and it was like it was actually right on the borderline, some of the episodes of a little too creepy for me, even though they're not that creepy, but I was a wuss. Even now I'm still a wuss, but I remember watching it, and then from there it was airing daily right at the time I got home from school in junior high. And because they were doing an episode a day, you got through it really quickly. So I ended up watching the whole series.
Yeah.
Get home, grab a bowl of the shittiest sugary cereal, and watch StarGate. So, and then I just fell in love. And from there, I just rewatched the series 20 times. But that's not the point. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the movie.
We're trying to get into talking about the better series.
And then eventually, like, just from loving the series, I went, I should probably see the movie. And I think Dad and I watched the movie at one point, and I was like, oh, so this is how it started. And I remember at that point I really liked it, but I think that was just the hype of this is more StarGate. It's not it's not amazing.
Well, it's an interesting premise, and it's one that's sort of written by Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, and directed by Roland Emmerich, who people are probably more familiar with for having done 2012, Independence Day, those sorts of big disaster movies. I was surprised, knowing that it was a Roland Emmerich film, that millions of people didn't die in the most gratuitous, over-the-top ways imaginable. So it's clear that this is earlier in his career when he actually needed like a premise to make a film instead of, big action pieces.
I will say, we haven't really gotten into it yet. Spoiler warning, we're going to spoil the shit out of this movie. I literally have I have sort of a timeline written down here to go through. So
what is StarGate 1994 all about?
It opens up in 8000 BC, and it's sort of showing this sort of tribal group of people just doing their thing, and then an alien spaceship starts to land, and they sort of show the people reacting to that, and then they skip straight into 1928, dig site in, if I remember correctly, Giza.
In a scene ripped straight out of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, for sure. Should be Giza. In the TV, so they always say it was found. The StarGate was found in Giza, so I'm going off that.
Let's go with it.
Yeah, they find it, they dig it up, they don't know what it is, and then it skips to quote-unquote present day, the 90s.
We get Belloc, old archaeologist guy, basically exclaiming, "What is this?" And then we go from there. It's great.
And we skip ahead to present day at what I assume is supposed to be an archaeology conference.
Yeah.
And we get my favorite character from the TV series, and maybe my favorite character from the movie as well, Daniel Jackson, played by James Spader.
James Spader. Yeah.
I know who he is. He's Ultron.
Yes,
He's
he
also
is.
Reddington Black from The Blacklist. That's not his name. His name is Reddington something. I don't think his name is Black. Anyways, present day, and basically he's going off about how the pyramids weren't built when everybody thinks they were built. They were built at a very different time and probably by aliens, but he's reluctant to actually say that because then everybody thinks he's crazy.
And it's clear he has no respect or clout in the scientific community. He's come up with all these like bonkers theories, basically saying all your evidence is wrong. You know, new evidence suggests that these new theories are actually correct, and you people are living a lie. And that doesn't do him any favors. It's a sort of Roland Emmerich cliche at this point, where the scientist who it's a scientist who looks crazy to everyone else, but actually knows what the heck he's talking about, is totally discredited and turns out vindicated in the end.
A small little tidbit that I absolutely love. So I'm gonna spoil the TV series a little bit. In the TV series, they explain that the Stargates were built by the first evolution of man. We are the second evolution of man. One of the things that those people did is they also built Atlantis. Atlantis is a real place. It's a city built by these first evolution of man called the Ancients in another galaxy. They also were the ones who built the Stargate. And a quote from one of the people making fun of Daniel Jackson saying that these pyramids were built by aliens is, who do you think built them? Men from Atlantis? Well, actually, no, the pyramids weren't, but the pyramids were built by the aliens who are using the Stargates built by the men from Atlantis.
Nice.
And I'm very curious if the showrunners, the whole idea for Atlantis that ends up being a spin-off series of SG-1,
They just
the TV
picked up
series,
on that one sort of
took that
throwaway
one
line.
line and made an entire 5-season series out of it.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
But yeah, so there's that.
But James Spader's character is quickly abducted. I mean, ushered into a vehicle with from this government agency. They pick up on the fact that he's actually spitting straight facts, and he has and they recognize his genius even when the rest of the academic community doesn't. He's taken to a secret military bunker, and promptly manages to show his expertise in, I think, what's one of the funniest scenes in the movie, where he's asked to translate some Egyptian hieroglyphs, and the scientists there have already done their part, but, you know, he just walks in there and magically translates everything perfectly.
Because he is a super genius.
Exactly.
Another little tidbit. The first of the actors who are in the movie and the TV series, Gary Mayers, PhD, the man who Daniel goes and corrects, is played by Richard Kind, who does come back, not in SG-1, but in Atlantis, and not as Gary Mayers, but as Lucius Lovin, the very annoying, over-the-top character.
Lucius Lovin. That sounds like a character from Harry Potter. That's a good name.
His, like, the first episode he's in, his whole thing is he's got some sort of, like, magical, there's a scientific explanation for it because it's sci-fi, not fantasy, but some sort of magical elixir that he wears as, like, perfume that makes everyone basically fall in love with him.
Straight out of Harry Potter.
And the main characters fall in love with him, and then it goes through him, like, trying to be in charge of Atlanta. Yeah. Just, I thought that was interesting that he's one of the few actors who have been in both the TV and the movie, even though not the same character.
Nice.
But yeah, moving forward from there, Jackson figures out that you need to use the symbols to dial the Stargate in the well, he does a translation and then later figures out what the symbols mean. And in a meeting with a bunch of people smoking a lot of cigarettes and drinking a lot of coffee, he explains all this only to find out that it is real. The Stargate is real, and he just figured out how to use it.
Yeah.
That these symbols are representations of star constellations that would be used to triangulate a point in space.
How does he figure out that it is, in fact, constellations that are being depicted on the Stargate? It's a pretty dumb scene.
I don't remember.
He goes to, like, refill the coffee pot with water, and he sees the guard reading. He sees a security guard reading from the newspaper, and there's a constellation of Orion on the front. I forget what it's advertising, but it's just there, and it's like his eureka moment, and it seems kind of dumb.
Yeah, it's not the first dumb point
It's
in this
not the
movie,
first
but
dumb thing in this movie, but it starts you off good.
yeah.
This it doesn't weight itself down with a lot of like scientific jargon or mumbo jumbo. It's like, oh, these constellations, they're coordinates, and
Ah,
it basically allows us to transport to location A to location B once we know where in three-dimensional space these locations are. Great, you can get past that very quick. It doesn't spend a lot of time talking about physics or all the crazy
how to
convoluted
an
details.
artificial wormhole, for
Oh
example,
yeah, yeah.
which they do get again in the TV series. They got way more time to get into that. So then they figure it out, and the decision is made. They've got to go. They've got to go to this planet. They've figured out how to dial the gate, and they've got to go.
But that's not before we're introduced to Colonel Kurt
Yes,
Russell.
Colonel Kurt Russell, Colonel Jack O'Neill, a very important character in both the movie and the TV series, as you would expect. Interestingly, they go from Kurt Russell, big name actor, to in the TV series Richard Dean Anderson, aka MacGyver,
Nice.
which is an interesting change.
I'll still stick with Kurt Russell any day. He was Snake Plissken, so
I actually don't like Jack in this movie as much.
I'm with you on that. It doesn't take advantage of much of Kurt Russell's charisma. We just get the depresso espresso Colonel, and that's about the end of his characterization until the very end.
Did you catch the whole reasoning as to why he's so depressed?
Oh yeah,
And I mean, they outright say it, but
well they say and they don't tell. It's his son had just killed himself recently in a gun accident, which they don't
His-
elaborate was
his-
suicide or not.
they do elaborate more in the TV series, but I think what they're trying to tell you and what it ends up being in the TV series is his son not commit suicide because he was was playing with a gun and accidentally killed himself. And it
Okay.
turns out that gun was Jack O'Neill's service pistol.
Ah,
And that is why. And that is why they choose him to go on this what turns out to be very much a suicide mission.
okay. I thought it was just the fact that he's a colonel sort of.
No,
being called back
the
into
general
service, so he hadn't
who
been,
chose
like,
him knows
discharged.
he's got
A
absolutely
death
nothing
wish.
to lose at
Yeah,
this point.
yeah.
He's like, I don't care.
And the way that we get this information is that the two army officers who come to get him from his home, they have a brief exchange of dialogue saying, "Oh boy, you look pretty down, didn't he?" Well, that's no surprise. His son just accidentally killed himself, and that's what we get.
We do get a brief introduction to his wife, who we never see ever again in anything. She doesn't exist.
Yeah, clearly
They're
he has
di-
nothing to live for.
By the TV series, they're divorced, and that's it.
Okay,
She's never to be seen again.
that would go a bit further to sell us that he's a little more down in the dumps.
I think the implication is that the divorce happens because he's so down in the dumps and it destroys their marriage.
That makes more sense.
Even though by the end of the movie he seems fine.
Oh, yeah.
But I guess you could argue
He overcomes that
Ter-
through several means. He sort of gets a surrogate son in a character that
Scar.
he meets later on. Yes.
Skara, the next, and we'll get to talking about who Skara is, but the next of the characters played by actors who continue to play that Skara is played by Alexis Cruz, who does return for the role of Skara in the TV series. Nice. One of the few carryovers. So they've got Jack O'Neill, and basically what they know about the StarGate is that it will take them to at least one other planet. They have been unable to make it take them anywhere until Daniel Jackson comes in and super geniuses the solution to going there. And that there's bad aliens at the other end, probably. So their solution is they're going to send Daniel Jackson, Colonel Jack O'Neill. Is Kowalski a major?
I don't
Major
remember his
Kowalski?
rank. I just thought him all as interchangeable military guys.
The other important character in my opinion is Kowalski because he does make a return in the TV series, though I believe it's a different actor. But Kowalski does come back in the TV series. But yeah, basically a bunch of military dudes, Colonel Jack O'Neill and Dr. Daniel Jackson are going to go through the gate and see what's at the other side. The thing they don't tell anybody except Colonel Jack O'Neill is that they're also sending a nuclear bomb. So that if there are aliens at the other end, they're going to do the most American thing possible and just nuke the shit out of them.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, it was a few years before Starship Troopers, so it's always good to see that That militaristic spirit continues even before a movie like that.
It's just, I guess you know, it doesn't. It makes sense because that
You got
feels like what
humanity
they
at
would
stake.
do.
Yeah.
The logic doesn't track. They have the technology to build ships that can land on our pyramids and portals that can transport you across the galaxy. One nuke is gonna wipe them out. We already know they can travel between planets and like in space. One nuke is gonna. What if there's just more of them on another
Oh, I'm
planet?
sure.
Now you've just pissed them off.
By the time we see the actual alien threat in this movie, we learn that it is not much of a threat and that they are easily defeatable by even the dumbest of the human cast.
In the movie, yes, and then that changes.
Good.
But yes. So they go to this planet.
But it's not before our dear Dr. Jackson gets the magical amulet, Chekhov's amulet in this case, that will come in very, very handy in the story to come.
I never thought of the I saw it. I never thought about it as like a Chekhov's gun.
Plot point
thing.
bells, ding
Yeah.
ding ding.
Interesting.
Here, take this amulet of no real significance. Well, no, it's very significant.
Yeah, so they go. Actually, no, I'm gonna jump back a bit. They dial the gate. It goes the whole of Cheyenne Mountain shakes and rumbles, and then it activates.
And we get this wonderful abyss-like sequence with when the gate activates. There are these really cool like water effects, which actually really surprised me for like 1994. Has some really fun.
I have some fun facts about that. That's where
good.
I'm getting to. One, it's called the Kawoosh. Now and forever, it is called the Kawoosh. Even in the TV series, the characters, it is technically the unstable event horizon of the artificial wormhole. They call it the Kawoosh. Even the scientist who understands it, because Jack O'Neill's too dumb to understand it, calls it the Kawoosh.
Nice.
I'm going to get the details a little bit wrong because it's been a while since I heard this story. But my understanding is the VFX guys that came up with that. It was really genius in my opinion. They got a waterproof camera, they stuck it underwater pointing up, and they took an air gun and sprayed air into the water.
Oh, nice.
And it's the air making that like water drop effect that comes down. People can't see my hands, but the Kawoosh into the water that they then like rotoscoped and or colored and did some effects on to make the effect of the StarGate.
It's a damn good effect. I think it's the best one in the film.
The director hated it.
Really?
They showed it to him and he fired them on the spot. And then a while later, for some reason, rehired them. And then they needed an effect for the gate, and they reapproached him about it, and he fired them again. And then later rehired them again. Very Tommy Wiseau-esque.
Dude,
the
Roland Emmerich was notoriously capricious on a lot of his movies. Like his actors and the other people working with him like didn't get a good sense of what he wanted or what he was doing. Part of that was like the language barrier. I think it was from Germany or Austria, but you know he was very, very flighty and fun to work with apparently. And by that I mean totally unpredictable and chaotic.
If I'm not mistaken, in the end, they just didn't have anything else and they ran out of time and budget, so he said screw it, let's go with that, and it's actually really fantastic.
Yeah,
it's actually quite good and does and again carries over into the, I'm sure by the late like I think like the 10th season of StarGate came out in like 2008 or something like that. By then they were doing some computer effects on it.
Oh yeah.
Especially in the later seasons. Eventually they introduce a SuperGate, which is a StarGate in space big enough for ships to go through.
I'm surprised he hated that effect because it looked really good. And if you take a look at some of the effects later in the film, you get the spaceships that are like clearly being held up by strings that are like very planned
like
from outer space.
I love it because it's practical and looks really good. It gets around the fact that a lot of the time you can get practical effects that don't look very good because they're not very.
There's some cheap and really schlocky stuff later on in this movie.
And just in general, the time your choice was, you hope you have a guy who can or a team who can do practical effects well, because computer effects aren't very good at this point. So yeah, they get the big Kawoosh, whatever. They go through the gate, and they end up in a dark hole somewhere.
Yep.
They can't see anything. I'm going to sort of move through this bit a little bit quickly, but they quickly realize that they are inside a pyramid, inside the side of a hill on the alien planet. and they start setting up. And what needs to happen is Dr. Daniel Jackson needs to figure out the symbols to dial home, so
Or else they're stuck.
or else they're stuck and gonna get nuked. From there, we get the lovely comedic effect of Daniel Jackson meeting a giant
Desert Tauntaun.
buffalo type thing
Mm-hmm.
that gets scared, runs off. Of course, in a a slapstick.
He's being
20s
dragged
style,
behind it.
The rope wraps around his foot. He gets dragged along, and that leads them to discover this entire civilization that's on this planet. The people who decide that they're gods because they must have come through the Stargate, and only gods come through the
They
Stargate.
see
And they
Dr.
see the
Jackson's
amulet.
magical little amulet with the Eye of Ra in it, and they seem to think that he's the god Ra returned to them. Because they're all they're like the technological level of like the ancient Egyptians. The sort of culture is very similar. For them,
yes.
writing has been banned, outlawed. Their dialect is very like ancient Egyptian.
And I don't know how well they explain that in the movie, but there's a reason for that. And the reason basically is that they are like the most of humanity that you can access through the Stargate using the set of symbols that are on this planet they've gone to were put there by the evil gods as slaves brought from ancient Egypt on Earth.
Mhm.
They originate in ancient Egypt on Earth, but they've been subjugated for thousands upon thousands
They
of
do
years,
explain that.
years.
There are a few bits of dialogue that our big bad Ra comes later on in the film and explains that. There's a big language barrier to begin with, and this is sort of one of the areas where it gets into like sort of sci-fi conceptual territory. One of the sort of themes and ideas that you see a lot in science fiction, you see in like Star Trek a lot, in movies like Enemy Mine, is language and communications. How do you communicate with people who are either alien or who like don't speak your language? And we get to hear a lot of the language of these like ancient Egyptian tribespeople, and there's no subtitles for the longest time in the movie.
Nope.
And it's unusually artsy a decision. It's odd. This film did pretty well. It was a bit of a blockbuster, the 15th highest grossing movie of '94, and it's an odd decision because you don't see that a lot in big blockbusters. But what they do, what's really clever, I think, is once Dr. Jackson sort of learns the language and pieces it together, like 70, 80 minutes into the film, they start subtitling it.
Yes.
Whenever Jackson's present. So, he understands it, and then we as the audience understand it as well. I was very surprised by that. I thought that was unusually clever.
Yeah, and it lets them sort of... They don't have to do a Star Trek and we've got this magic device that is a translate everything box.
Yeah, the universal translator.
That is never universal either. it never fucking, like, half of the stories in Star Trek are, it's not working.
Darmak and Jalad at Tanagra.
Exactly. That's
not really a failing of the translator. It's just they've encountered a language that is like
so weird.
They just can't figure out how it works.
On a side note, that's one of my favorite episodes conceptually.
Mine too.
But it's so boring. I found it super fucking boring.
It gives us the most badass Picard moment where he just walks up onto the bridge and knows the alien's language, having like learned it for the past 40 minutes and gone through all this.
It gives
crap.
you a lot of Picard is the Daniel Jackson of Star Trek.
Yeah.
In a way. Going back to Stargate, so yeah, they've met these people. Jackson sort of figures out how to communicate a little bit, and essentially they get invited over for dinner. They're gonna go hang out with these people and eat dinner, and sort of figure out what they're all about. And an early part of dinner that ends up being sort of significant is a bunch of the tribal women come up with their sort of leaf-shaped buckets of drink, and to me at least, it seems pretty obvious that, like, if you take the drink, that means you're married. That's how this works. And Daniel Jackson takes the drink. He ends up married, basically. he takes the drink, they have dinner, whatever, and then they go to bed, and the woman that he has taken the drink from, who turns out to be the daughter of the leader of the tribe,
Shiori is
Share.
Share.
Yeah, pronunciation's a little.
That's our main female lead of this film.
She shows up and starts taking off all of her clothes.
Yes.
And I don't know how to feel about this scene because because I get like they're just the way that it would have been for their cultural development, which is basically stuck in 8000 BC culture, right?
Mhm.
Not saying it's good, but that's where they would have been.
It's the universe that they're in.
I don't know. And then yeah, Jackson does kind of the right thing of like, I feel his pain in that situation because like he really doesn't want to sleep with, like he doesn't want this.
Oh yeah, he feels weird about the whole
He's
situation.
super weirded out. He is also a super awkward nerd to begin with. And then like, but also realizes shortly after trying to get her to leave
Well, that's a
that
grave
it's a
insult.
huge insult and actually probably means she's gonna be looked down upon by the tribe. So then he doesn't make her leave, but then what's the assumption? And then
Well, it's great how you can pick up on all of that when most of the dialogue is done in a completely ridiculous made-up language. You
Yeah.
get the sense of like the shock and like you refuse our gift from the tribe's leader. It's basically a grave insult. It's like, is my daughter not good enough for you?
turns out she is, but that's later in the movie that they end up and legitimately in the TV series she does end up being his wife.
Yeah.
And playing an important role, and he does fall in love with her. They start figuring out what's going on, and then the bad guys show up.
Indeed. What was the trigger for them showing up? Did they just show up, or did they like somehow realize the Stargate was activated? I wasn't clear on that.
Honestly, I wasn't either. I think they just showed up. It's just bad luck.
Because the plot demands them to.
Yeah. And we get introduced first of all to the, I don't know what they would be called, because obviously this god gets killed. In the TV series, the next god comes and takes over, and he's the snake god. So he has the serpent guard, and their heads are snakes. In this, they're jackals.
It's a combination of there's the Horus guy, there's the Anubis one, but yeah, basically Ra, we learn a bit about the backstory, isn't a god. He's like from this super advanced alien race, and he came to Earth and this desert planet that we're on now, and basically sort of invaded. Ra himself was like sick and dying. He was like the last of an alien race, had some sort of like incurable illness, and he just needed like a body to possess. So they get to this planet, find this human kid, possesses him, gets worshipped as a god because, you know, of all their technology and power,
yeah.
and that sort of goes into myth. The you know, the Raw guy leaves, everything goes into myth. He's the one that commanded that that the humans on this planet never learn how to read, but his guard are humans? I wasn't totally clear on that.
Yeah, they don't, again, I don't think they explain, there's a lot to this universe that doesn't get into this movie that gets made up for the show. In the show, the guard are human, but
they're not possessed by the same species that Raw is, are they?
Are. In the show, they have a cross-shaped opening in their belly.
Okay.
And a special sack where the like young like child version of the alien that is possessing that body, they basically use them as incubators. And in
Krang style, Quato style, yes.
Yes. And including the open your shirt the snake comes out almost alien-esque with the chest burster, but
nice.
Like the stomach, and it explains that these guard, they're called the Jaffa, live extremely long and are stronger and faster and more capable than most other humans, because the larvae version of this alien essentially is a steroid for them. It replaces their immune system with something much stronger.
Okay, so like a symbiotic parasite type relationship.
And that's what keeps these ultra powerful warriors, besides the fact that these warriors are taught to believe that their gods are literal gods,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you are loyal to your god. Without these aliens, they would die, because once the alien isn't in you, you have no immune system, and you basically you die.
Mhm.
Similar to people who have immune disorders in real life, but it's just this thing's gone, you have no immune system, you die. So that's what they are. If we want to talk about effects in this movie that aren't good,
There's
the helmet, the way the helmet on the guards opens,
that's some janky CG there.
some janky CG.
I like the look of the helmets. It has this cool like biomechanical look. The eyes of like the Anubis and the Horus guards are these really cool like lens effects, and they can change color when they're like zooming in. Um, that's really cool. The costumes are all right, but they grow increasingly ridiculous, and Raw's outfits just become so absurd and crazy and cheap looking. It's not the best. It's not as like opulent as sort of should have been done. They feel a bit cheap.
And I'm not sure how in the TV series they do the effect, but in the TV series, and it's a different, mostly at least to start the TV series, it's a different god. It is Anubis in this one, so the guards are different. They have snake heads, but the snake heads are made up of like overlapping plates of metal that fold back, and they don't fold back completely, like there's some left, but the effect is just so from episode 1, the effect is infinitely better than this movie.
Yeah.
It looks significantly more practical. I don't know how they did it, but it's just
In this movie, it feels like it sort of whooshes back and disappears in a very
it just evaporates.
90s CG style. It
Yeah.
doesn't fit with the world.
And a little bit of hand wavy, like they have super technology,
Sure.
therefore and then not a lot else very interesting necessarily happens. They basically do the action movie thing. They fight the bad guys. They win.
Yeah, but this is after Dr. Jackson magically learns how to speak the language, or seemingly magically. He and
Share.
Share. Oh, my pronunciation is so bad. Everyone's gonna butcher me. Basically, takes him to the catacombs.
Yeah.
Where he learns the language off of the wall paintings, and he's basically like, oh, the dialect is just the same. It's just you got to learn the vowels properly, and it's a very hand wavy way of him sort of learning the language. And at that point, he also comes across the sort of signal stone that gives the coordinates necessary for them to activate the StarGate. But the last sign, the 7th one, is missing, and that becomes a plot element going forward as well. So at this point they're getting invaded by Ra, the technologically advanced, alien destructor, and we still haven't activated Stargate, and the rest of the cast is finally learning what Colonel Kurt Russell is up to, and have to deal with the bomb that he attached to the Stargate.
Indeed.
High stakes.
Big ass bomb.
High stakes.
Which you find out. Actually, I don't know if you find out in this movie, but that bomb would do significantly more, because the nuclear reaction would set off the material that the Stargate's made out of, which makes it even more reactive.
Right.
Yeah, they kind of. I don't know. This is where it kind of just. The rest happens. I'm less interest.
This movie is really carried by the premise, which has a lot of interesting ideas and details that aren't fully fleshed out. The characters are a bit shallow. It's a combination like adventure in the style of like Indiana Jones or The Mummy, and those movies are always carried by the characters and sort of like the unique visuals, unique ideas. Like Raiders of the Lost Ark is. You don't need complex villains. The villains in Raiders are, actual Nazis. You don't get like much more black and white morality than that. But what carries it is like, Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones, Marin and all the characters and quips and weird images of raiders in a lot of the other Indiana Jones films. This one doesn't quite have that. The characterization seems quite thin, especially with someone like, Dr. Jackson. His character traits are nerd, socially awkward, super genius, and
Yeah.
that's sort of about it.
Strong morals.
He isn't really challenged. He doesn't really have to undergo much or do much in terms of what's like particularly impressive. Colonel Kurt Russell is sort of just along for the ride, and he has some good scenes with the surrogate son, Skara, who the kid, he teaches him how to use a lighter, and they of course think it's magic. He teaches them not to use assault rifles, which is good thinking on his part.
His whole a big part of his whole character is children must not use guns because my son died.
That's something I can get behind.
I'm okay with that. But then they end up using the guns anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Because the next major plot point sort of is obvious. So the main characters, Jackson and O'Neill, get captured by the bad guys. They're up on the ship.
Oh, didn't mention that Raw, our villain, is played by Jay Davidson, who was also in The Crying Game previously. He plays a very androgynous role in that movie. And that was sort of part of his casting in this movie, is that they wanted him to sort of creep you out a bit. And that's why he is flanked by these groups of like nubile slave children.
Yeah, that
There's some weird stuff, and it's sort of meant to creep you out as an audience member.
Which it does.
Yeah. And there's some unintentional hilarity at the end of the film regarding those kids. But we'll get into that. But it's a creepy visual, and the way they do like the processing on his voice, it's this really like deep, bizarre sort of voice that doesn't match the lips. There's some like eye effects that really like glowy eye effects and make him look quite alien.
Those two will very much persist through the TV series.
Yeah. But it turns out the aliens are very easily defeatable. Their main source of technology are their ships on wires.
Yeah.
There are some scenes scenes in the movie where you see the wires on the spaceships, and it looks kind of janky. And these giant like stabs that are capable of shooting like this electrical energy.
And I would argue one of the themes of the movie, though it's far less obvious and far less pronounced than the TV series, is that if you think about it and you look at the way things progress, the downfall of the aliens is overconfidence, and that their entire technology has progressed and evolved over however many thousands of years of subjugating significantly technologically inferior humans to do that. You look at the staff weapons, and if you really think about it, they're not, and I am sort of stealing this concept from the TV series because they talk about this later on. Someone literally says this line, but you look at a staff weapon. A staff weapon is a weapon to scare people, to terrorize people. You look at a gun. You look at an assault rifle made by humans on Earth. This is a weapon to kill people, and that is it.
Yeah, it's ruthlessly practical. Yeah, the aliens certainly seem to be all about pomp and circumstance. Their attire, their masks aren't particularly effective. It seems to be all about sort of scaring or intimidating humans into
which
subjugation.
makes sense. They've spent thousands of years
Sure.
intimidating humans. That's their whole livelihood, their whole everything is based on we are the gods, you fear us.
But what comes with that is that they are easily defeatable, even by a ragtag gang of children
with earth guns.
With earth guns.
And a nuke. The nuke plays a big role.
Nuke plays a big role, as we see.
We get introduced shortly. Okay, so the main characters are captured by the bad guys. We go through the whole creepy voice, nubile slave man, that whole fun. And then it comes to they're going to be executed in front of the entire village on the sort of plateau stairwell in front of the pyramid.
And Dr. Jackson has to do that himself. Raw tasks him with killing his comrades, and Raw lets him know that soon after that he will blow up Earth.
So what actually happens is all of these, teenage boys essentially in the village have gone and collected a bunch of guns. They've gone and collected a bunch of the guns that the humans brought with them. Why this team of about 5 or 10 dudes brought like 25 assault rifles, some rocket launchers, like why they
Colonel
brought so
Kurt
much?
Russell has contingency plans. He knows what he's doing.
I guess they were going into a situation where they expected to run into an entire armada of aliens and have
Go
to
prepared.
set off a nuke, but like, still, where did it all? Anyways, they got a
Oh,
whole bunch of guns.
The best thing about the guns too is that they all make the stock effect, the like the standard
very-
stock
It
stock.
tis a 90s movie.
Yeah.
So these boys, they have the guns. They're all sort of gathered with the rest of the village to watch the execution. Dr. Jackson realizes that they have the guns and that there's sort of a plan here. So instead of shooting his friends, he turns and shoots one of the guards, and all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, in all the chaos, the Colonel Kurt Russell and the rest of the soldiers manage to break away and escape and get away from the aliens, and they reconvene with our ragtag gang of child soldiers.
And then basically a rebellion happens. They fight the gods. They go through a bunch of combat. And I think what happens is by this point the nuke has been armed for a while. So Colonel Jack O'Neill and Daniel Jackson go to try and stop the nuke from going off. And they can't. It won't disarm. The military chose Jack O'Neill because they knew he had nothing to lose. But knowing that he's still a man of morals, or he may just be a what they would call a coward, he may change his mind. They instead gave him a nuke that cannot be disarmed. It's going off no matter what. And earlier in the movie, we get introduced to a piece of technology called I don't know if they give it a name in the movie, but they're called the rings, a ring platform. Basically, a mini version of the StarGate that instead of transporting you thousands of light years across the galaxy, transports you
to the other set of rings.
To the other set of rings, at most a few hundred kilometers away to a ship in orbit, if it were so, or in this case, a ship a few hundred meters up above the pyramid that they're in.
Little teleporter device.
And basically, some more fighting happens, and then they send the nuke up on the rings and blow up the ship.
And presumably the nubile slave children. I don't think the filmmakers thought too much about this.
No.
But they managed to warp the nuke onto the ship, blowing up Ra, and we just see Ra, but we don't see the children off the ship at any point in this film. So yeah, they blew up a couple dozen children as well.
They quote unquote saved the day.
They saved the day.
They saved
with just a little bit of collateral damage.
Yes. End of movie, basically.
The culmination of Jackson's character arc is that he realizes that he has a better life on this desert planet, living with Sha'Rai, and decides to stay. I thought Colonel Kurt Russell would stay as well. I thought he'd have more to live for in this sort of world.
But I think
he still has a job to do back on Earth, I suppose.
And the intent is that he knows that that probably the U.S. government and the military aren't going to, or the Air Force in this case, aren't going to be satisfied with we blew up one ship. They're going to want to send another nuke to destroy the StarGate itself and this planet. So he probably realizes that if he doesn't go back and tell the military that they succeeded in their job, that the nuke went off behind them, that they would send another nuke and kill all these people, including Daniel Jackson and his new surrogate son and whatever. So he leaves and tells Jackson to bury the StarGate for a year. And we'll check on you in a year or whatever.
Okay.
Or unbury it in a year. I don't know. Again, I can't. I did watch this movie in preparation for this, and I have seen it a handful of times. I still get details a little fuzzy between it and the TV show. In the TV show, it starts up a year later.
It
And
seems like
Jackson,
it sounds like the TV show really worked sort of hard retroactively to make sense of a lot more details and pick up on a lot more plot details in the film, things that are only like hinted at or not stated in this movie.
yeah.
The movie makes sense, but it seems like a lot of these details that you're providing really
And
fleshes us out and gives more
things you're
context.
sort of intended to infer, or they just felt weren't necessary.
Which is fair. I mean, it's already like a 2-hour movie. You can only give so
Yeah.
much details and exposition.
And that brings us to one thing that I thought I wanted to mention, one retcon that they make. And this is, we're jumping back to more near the beginning of the movie, but at the beginning of the movie, they've got this big board that's a transparent glass representation of the known galaxy,
Mhm.
and this 2-axis arm that shows where the wormhole is traveling, where it ends up based off of telemetry they're getting out of the Stargate. How they know how to interface with the Stargate without understanding how to use it or what
In
it
the
really
first place.
does, I don't know. But they make this comment. They watch this thing go across the board, and then someone makes a comment to Jackson. I think it's Catherine that recruited him, makes a comment, yes, that is the other side of our known galaxy. That gets so retconned so hard in the first episode of the TV series.
Nice.
Because how do you make a TV series if there's one planet you can go to? There's not a lot of story left, right? So they retcon that with, there's a whole bunch of addresses on there. There's a whole bunch of addresses in the runes at this planet,
Mhm.
known as Abydos, eventually. A whole bunch more addresses. The reason that they can't dial any of them, even though like they spent all, like, between the end of the movie and the start of the TV series, like a year goes by, they spend that whole year just trying addresses, and one of them should have worked. And probably some of the ones they tried are addresses that are on this what they call a cartouche in the end on this planet. They don't work. And the reason they give is that the addresses that were created thousands upon thousands of years ago. Things in space move.
Mm.
They go interstellar drift. The universe is expanding. Things aren't where they're supposed to be anymore. Your dialing device, your supercomputer in this case, Earth-based supercomputer, has to know to calculate for stellar drift. The reason that this one planet works is because it's relatively close to Earth compared to everything else on the
I
planet.
see. So the Stargate doesn't know how to respond to new phone who dis.
In a way, so the Stargate as a ring doesn't know how to do anything. It is just a big supercapacitor, essentially, with some mechanics for generate. But it's actually what they call the dial home device, the DHD, or in Earth's case, a 1990s supercomputer that tells it what to dial, how to dial it, where it is, how to make the connection. And because things have drifted, now the super smart aliens that we find out about later in the TV series that built these Stargates, their dial home devices, their DHD, their dialing devices already know how to do this. So they just work because these people were way smarter than humans. Humans haven't done this. So because this one planet that Jackson has lived on for a year in the movie is in the TV series relatively close to Earth, the amount that they have drifted, they're drifting sort of in the same direction as the universe expands for the most part, and because they're close together, the distance change is fairly minimal. The further away from where you are in the galaxy, from Earth in the galaxy you get, the more things have shifted, the more dramatic the interstellar drift is. Those addresses no longer work, so they figure out they have to write a program to run on Earth's supercomputer to calculate for this.
Ah.
And that's how they set up the whole TV series, is every week's episode, until we get into some more larger overarching storyline, every week's episode is, it takes it takes a week or 2 weeks for Earth's best computer to calculate a new address. So every week is, we've got a new address to try. Let's go there and see what
How
happens.
convenient for a weekly TV series, yes.
Right? And it's just that. Just
That's a good premise for a sci-fi serial.
yeah, so I wanted to point out that they retconned that.
Well, I actually know how things sort of should have ended after the end of the movie. Is that we get Dr. Jackson, and one of his character quirks is that he sneezes a lot. He's apparently has a flu or something, and I kept expecting that to come back in some way. Mainly that he's bringing to this new planet of sort of pre-industrial humans diseases from the 20th century. He's
Nope.
he's bringing
It's
smallpox
actually
and the
just
flu.
fine.
It's actually just fine, but realistically, like, there, the immune system of the people on Abydos should not have been able to keep up with these 20th century humans and their advanced diseases.
It's
And a week
fine.
after he decides to say everyone just comes down with like smallpox and diphtheria and everyone is dead except Jackson.
It does come back, not in that way. What happens is,
I kept expecting it to be a plot point because he sneezes so goddamn much.
yeah, no, it's just a funny character flaw.
Okay.
Character trait, not really a flaw. It comes back in the TV series in literally episode 1, so I don't feel too bad about spoiling this. That what happens is, it's been a year. They unbury the gate. Jackson dials Earth, and I don't know what I can't remember what he does. They dial Earth, and then the U.S. Air Force goes, "Hey, what the heck? This guy's supposed to be dead. This gate isn't supposed to exist. Jack, what the fuck?" And Jack goes, "Yeah, actually, we didn't blow it up because there's like a bunch of people there and whatever. We got to go check on them."
Yeah.
And the Air Force goes, "Well, how do we know it's actually Jackson and not one of these evil aliens?" So they send through a box of tissue paper, a box of Kleenex. They send it through, and then a little while later, the gate dials up. It comes back through with Sharpie on it that just says, "Please send more," and it's an empty box.
Nice.
And Jack goes, "Yup, that's got to be Daniel."
He was a sneezy boy.
I think we're getting near to the end of this movie, what we have to say, and near to the end of our timeline. But you wanted to mention the soundtrack, the
Yes.
scoring to this movie.
Gives a very sweeping mystical feel to these to affairs. It really enhances the opening like Indiana Jones shot, really gives you that sense of sort of mystery. I wrote mystical, rousing, epic. This is what came to my mind.
So I did the very intelligent thing of I wrote down a representation of the notes from the line that I'm pretty sure is pretty important in the music. I'm not a musician. I don't know what the fuck this is supposed to mean that I wrote down. But basically, there's the one like riff, the one series of notes that is the Stargate sound. It's like da 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 da. That all the way through the TV series. That never goes away. That is
Yeah,
core
it's the main
Stargate.
theme.
We have, where do I have it written down here? We have David Arnold to thank for that. David Arnold is also known for having scored, I think most recently, of the movies that I felt were notable, most recently Casino Royale,
Nice.
Independence Day,
Yep. Another
the
Emmerich movie.
1993 Godzilla, and going back to James Bond, The World Is Not Enough.
Oh wow.
So a fairly accomplished musician composer
Yeah.
in the movie sphere, and I think he does a great job for this.
I think it's a good soundtrack. It fits. Yeah, it sort of combines that sort of science fiction adventure setting. I wanted to ask about that. How does this film hold up for you overall?
Like I said, 6 out of 10. It's. I think that my biggest problem with it was some of the janky CG really threw me off, and I'm in love with Stargate, with the Stargate that MGM created for me with the TV series.
Yeah.
This is a little different. And that's fine because this was more the vision of the original writers who were not the writers of the TV series and was intended to be very different. The Stargate that I love isn't as weird and creepy. It doesn't really have as much of the weird young boy slaves and that kind of thing. It's a little bit more fun. It doesn't take its and our friend Dan, that some of the listeners may or may not know, that you definitely know. Actually, that's one of the few TV series that I convinced him to watch and that he liked.
Nice.
And his thing, and I think an important thing with it is the TV series does not take itself very seriously. It knows that it's a silly sci-fi, and it's okay with that in a lot of ways.
This movie takes itself very seriously.
Yeah.
And it does so in a way that can't quite support it. I sort of observe that it's a blend of science fiction and adventure that sort of misses the mark on both accounts. It doesn't have this movie has pretty thin characterization. We don't get a real sense of these characters. We don't get a real sense of their issues and what they're overcoming and who they are. It misses the mark on being like a charming sort of adventure story in certain ways. There is a certain charm to this movie, absolutely. Part of that's sort of from the sort of schlockiness, but the premise, and this relates to like the sort of sci-fi stuff, is underdeveloped, but has so many like interesting elements, like this alien species, the idea of humans living on another planet for like 8,000 years, and then sort of being reacquainted with human beings from Earth. The StarGate being able to travel distances across civilizations. Some really really cool ideas, but then you get scenes like the first shot of the pyramid and the 3-moon backdrop on this planet, which is clearly Earth's moon flipped, reversed, and altered in size,
Yeah.
which really undermines the undermines the immersion and the sense of this being a fully realized world. Which is a shame because the premise is damn good, but it feels sort of watered down, a bit dumbed down, which, inevitably you're going to get more of a chance to explore these deeper ideas and themes in a TV series than you are with a, 2-hour blockbuster movie that goes for like, popcorn value and entertainment. But, it's a blend of adventure and sci-fi that doesn't quite do either well enough, and it's not good enough of a blend to really elevate it.
Yeah. It does get it gets way more fleshed out in the TV series. There's only so much they can do in a movie. I think the core premise that is my favorite part of the whole Stargate universe is the idea, and they expand upon it a lot in the TV series, and I keep going back to that. If you have anybody who hasn't seen it is listening, go watch it. Go watch. Get through the first season. Get through the first season. If you don't like it from there, fine, but get through the first season. The idea that, at least starting out with like the ancient Egyptian gods and the whole mythos around them, was real in that it was these aliens creating this mythos to enslave the humans at the time. The pharaohs of old were these aliens,
which is a damned interesting sci-fi premise. There's a lot to do with that.
And they really expand on that in the show, that and I won't spoil how so or what other races or whatever are what, but the Norse gods end up also being something related, and some of the Celtic gods. And at one point, I mean, this is only like a 1-episode arc, so it's like a minor spoiler. At one point, they made a Gould who's literally portraying like the Judeo-Christian devil. He's literally the devil. That is his role. And this village have like weekly or monthly sacrifices where they pick someone who clearly has been sinning because they've got chicken pox or whatever. They are a sinner, and like chain them up outside in the village square. Everybody hides, and this Gould shows up and takes them to hell, is their assumption.
Yeah.
Like this idea that these advanced aliens, and they even expand to the story of Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, and Merlin is also related to some aliens in a way. And that's very, very later in the series and deals with a whole bunch of new stuff. But Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, it's all these famous mythos. And like I was saying, Atlantis, the story of Atlantis is also because of some, not actually aliens, I guess in this case, they were humans, but like,
it's some pretty well-trodden sci-fi ground. There are some good books and short stories in like the 50s and 60s that explore similar ideas. There are similar Star Trek episodes, Doctor Who episodes that sort of explore similar ideas of these sort of ancient deities from old mythologies being, aliens. And it's good stuff.
Yeah, I think perfect premise, good enough execution.
Good enough for the most part. Yeah, there's some schlockiness that makes it kind of fun. Yeah, I don't know if I'd recommend this film.
I would. I'd recommend this film. Watch it so you know what the heck a Stargate is, and then go watch the TV series.
Yeah. I guess your mileage will vary depending on how much you like old school sci-fi, because this
Yeah.
is old school in certain ways and also, modern Hollywood in others, and it's a weird blend.
Okay, well, I think that's about it. We're at 58 and a half minutes at this point. That's pretty good. We will be back. We haven't actually decided on our schedule at this point in recording, but
I won't tell anyone.
we will be back in a while. When this episode gets posted, I will also post the schedule. The next movie, if anybody wants to view it before listening to our next episode of the podcast, will be the 2021 rendition of Dune. So go watch that. It's on currently, as of recording, it's on HBO Max and in theaters. It'll probably be other places later on.
If you get a chance to see it in IMAX, I strongly recommend it. Find the biggest screen available.
And yeah. Thanks for listening, and that's it for today's episode.